At 1:30 on a Tuesday, I was prepared to greet a bowl of mashed potatoes with the dignity it deserved. Lunch is a ceremony at the brownstone, plotless and sacred, and any man who thinks mashed potatoes can't be ceremonial hasn't met Fritz Brenner at his stove. He whips them to satin and whispers to them with butter, and if that doesn't sound dignified to you, you're not invited. Wolfe was in his place at table, building a fortress around his appetite. He had just finished informing me that there is no practical difference between a man who will add cream to a puree and a man who will wear white shoes in January, and I was forming a reply that would have kept me out of both categories when Fritz came in carrying the serving dish like it held the crown jewels and a mouse that had learned to curse. He set it down 2 feet from Wolfe's plate and stepped back. His face had the all-over blanch that means a man has seen something that doesn't belong in his kitchen. "Archie," he said. The words were aimed at me, but his eyes were stuck to the oval of porcelain like they were held there with egg wash. "Look, now you can blame me for a lot in this house. Drafting checks, baiting clients, refusing to drink beer at breakfast, but you cannot blame me for ignoring mashed potatoes." I leaned in. The top, which should have been as smooth as Fritz's conscience and ridged in symmetrical swirls from the spoon, had been, if you will, autographed. Someone had raked 2 fingers lightly through the top layer, just enough to leave a word in low relief. Murder. Wolfe did not move anything as dramatic as an eyebrow. He glanced, and then he let his eyes return to mine, which had no better answers than they did before lunch, and then he let them settle on Fritz. "You do not play with food," he said. Fritz swallowed. "I don't," he said. "I do not." I took a tour of the obvious. "If this is your idea of a joke, it lacks a punchline." "My God," Fritz said to that, which is as close as he comes to cussing in company. "I would not." "No," Wolfe cut him off, not loudly. "You would not." "How did it come to be there?" Fritz pressed his palms together as if praying could rewind the last 15 minutes. "I plated them in the kitchen 5 minutes ago. I folded the butter in, as you like, and a touch of nutmeg. I smoothed the top. I turned. I sprinkled the chives." He lifted his eyes to the ceiling, searching for absolution it wasn't hiding. I left for 10 seconds to fetch the mustard. I forgot I had set it near the sink. When I returned, nothing looked wrong. I brought it in. I bent closer. The word had been made with confidence, no shaky hand dragging through. 2 decisive strokes for the M, the unlovely U, the rest of it as plain as on a ransom note. Not deep. You could smooth it out and no one would know unless you tipped the dish and took a look. If Fritz had been more rattled than he was, he might have sloshed the top and erased the message without seeing it at all. It was almost polite. "Where were you when you left for 10 seconds?" I asked. "In the kitchen," he said. I stepped to the sink. The door. He shook his head. "Closed. I did not go to the hall." "You were alone?" His eyes flicked to Wolfe, asking for permission to be offended. "Who else would be in my kitchen?" "Theodore's upstairs." "Mr. Wolfe is here. You don't look at me," I advised him. "If I take up a life of crime, it will not involve wasting potatoes." Wolfe's right forefinger made a tiny circle on the tablecloth and stopped, which is how he drums without admitting it. "Fritz," he said, "the nutmeg." Fritz blinked. "Sir." "You dusted," Wolfe said. "You set the grater down." "Where?" "On the second shelf to the left of the stove," Fritz said automatically, because if he doesn't know where he set it, he doesn't sleep. "With the cinnamon and the..." "And when you took it up," Wolfe said, "was it where it should be, and as it should be?" Fritz's eyes unfocused while his mind retraced his steps. Then they focused again, and something like fear crept in from the edges. No. The jar was turned. I always faced the labels forward. Mr. Wolfe, it was turned to the wall." "Phoy," Wolfe said softly, which is high emotion for him. "And you turned it back?" "Yes." Before or after the mustard? Before. I stood up. I'll go see who wrote the welcome message, I said, because that's on my list somewhere between answering phones and dusting orchids. Kitchen first. Wolfe nodded once. Don't destroy anything I may wish to see. Wouldn't dream of it. I went. Fritz's kitchen is the kind of place a man might confess in. Every surface tells you something about its owner, and all of it adds up to control. The second shelf left of the stove had the usual suspects. The nutmeg jar, label forward. If it had been turned to the wall, Fritz had corrected it reflexively and with enough vigor to almost rub the label off. I checked the door. Closed, the same nick in the paint that has been promising to be touched up since last spring. The back entrance off the little pantry was bolted. The window over the sink was latched. There was no potato thief crouched under the prep table waiting for me to turn around. The serving dish on the sideboard still had a little smear of puree from where Fritz had dipped the spoon for the final flourish. No drips anywhere else? It was neat work. Whoever had written in that bed of velvet had known they had to be quick and tidy. The bell rang. That made 2 violations in 5 minutes. Our bell is not allowed to ring during meals, except by prior arrangement or an act of God. I called to Fritz, who had followed me. Stay, and went to the hall to keep a sacrament from becoming a lobby. A woman of mid-30s stood outside, not looking like a woman who rings bells without an appointment. She had a manila envelope tucked under one arm and a posture you get from making presentations to people who don't appreciate graphs. Blonde hair pulled back, dark suit, shoes sensible but expensive. Her eyes went straight past me into the house and told me she wanted something from it. I'm sorry, I told her. We're full up on magazine subscriptions. I'm not selling anything, she said. I'm here to see Mr. Wolfe. I know it's lunch. I tried calling. I was told to come at 1:30. By who? I asked. She lifted the envelope slightly, as if it contained the name on a stick. By someone who writes notes in food. That got her in. I didn't have to like it. I escorted her to the office, which is where Mr. Wolfe receives even when he is not receiving. He was in his chair, of course, and leaned back just enough to indicate that visitors were part of a world he did not have to stand up for. I gave him the necessary and unadorned. Our potatoes have a vocabulary, and the bell was rung by an emissary. He looked at the woman as you look at a weather report. Your name? Lila Arkwright, she said. Public Relations Director for Rustermans. If you want to get Wolfe's attention without lighting a match under him, say Rustermans. It is his cathedral. He helped build it. And as with all completed cathedrals, he prefers to appreciate it from a distance while others worry about the roof. His eyes didn't exactly flicker, but if you told me he leaned forward a quarter of an inch, I wouldn't call you a liar. What do you want? He asked. She set the envelope on my desk, not his. 2 weeks ago, she said, we received an anonymous note. No return address, clipped letters, the whole melodrama, saying there would be murder in the mashed potatoes at our autumn tasting dinner. We assumed it was a crank. We increased security, laughed about it privately, and kept our puree in the kitchen. And last night, I prompted, because if she was here at our bell during lunch, the present tense had been disturbed. Last night, a diner collapsed during the second course, she said. Not dead, not yet. He's at St. Raphael's. The second course was a potato course. Pure coincidence, perhaps. Or not. This morning I got another note in my home mailbox, same style. It said, if you want help, go to Nero Wolfe at 1:30. He will be prepared. Prepared, Wolfe repeated, as if tasting it. He glanced at the dining room door, which was still ajar enough to let the word on the potatoes breathe. I tried calling, she said. Your man, Mr. Goodwin, I assume. Said Mr. Wolfe was at lunch, and if I valued my life, I would value his schedule. He didn't say I couldn't come. That is true, I admitted. I am often lax with matters of life and death. She looked between us. "I don't know if this is ridiculous," she said. "I do know I'm supposed to be responsible for how things look, and murder in the mashed potatoes looks terrible." Pfui. Wolfe made it official. "Language is an accessory to crime, not the crime. You have brought the envelope. What is in it?" "Copies of the notes, a seating chart from last night, a list of the kitchen staff on duty, and a statement from the servers," she said. "Also, my card." I took the envelope. The notes were the classic variety. Block letters cut from magazines glued to cardstock. The kind of thing we haven't seen since the invention of email. The phrase was the same in both. Murder in the mashed potatoes. The hand that cut the letters had a patient malice. The seating chart had underlines and initials made in pencil. I recognized 2 names without trying. Felix Courier, maître d'hôtel, who runs Rusterman's with an iron reservation book, and Gordon Vine, a food critic with a talent for adjectives and enemies. "Who collapsed?" I asked her. "Gordon Vine," she said. "After 2 bites of the potato course." He made a sound like he had swallowed a hornet and turned the color of a paper napkin. The doctor, who happened to be at table 3, did what he could until the ambulance came. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "You are not the police," he said. "Why are you here?" "Because someone told me to come," she said simply, and then, remembering where she was, added, "and because Rustermans cannot survive a panic. We've survived worse. But if this becomes a story about poison and parody, we lose." Wolfe looked at me, which is his way of looking at the world without moving. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Eat," he said. "Then take Miss Arkwright's statement in full. Ask Felix to expect you at 3. Do not meddle with doctors. Bring me a copy of the hospital's bulletin on Mr. Vine's condition, and tell Saul to be ready, but do not engage him." "Understood," I said. "And the fee?" Wolfe finally looked at the potatoes in the dining room the way a man looks at a painting someone has added a mustache to. "We shall take the case," he said, not to her, not to me, but to the air that had been invaded. "The reason can wait." Miss Arkwright let out a breath she'd kept in reserve. "Thank you." "You may thank me later," he said, "in money." I went to rescue lunch from literature. The word was still there, neat and modest and obscene. I looked at it and decided it could be my dessert. For the first time in memory, the potatoes were not the best thing on the table. The best thing was the certainty that someone had trespassed, and that Wolfe, in his chair, had decided to use it for bait. Fritz took the serving dish back to the kitchen like a mother carrying a baby who had said a bad word in church. Wolfe and I finished what was left on our plates with the respect we could salvage. The potatoes stayed in the dining room, untouched, word and all. If you think that's heartless, you haven't met Wolfe when his appetite is affronted. You can stab him with a fork easier than you can get him to eat an omen. Miss Arkwright waited in the office with her hands folded on her knee, which is a good way to keep them from reaching for your phone to check whether your world is on fire. Wolfe didn't offer her coffee. He didn't offer anyone coffee until he was ready to have some himself, and he wasn't ready. I cleaned my plate without staging a memorial, then took her into the office proper and sat at my desk with a pad. Wolfe settled, or rather, continued to be settled, in his chair. He shut his eyes, which would have been rude if it had meant what it means when other men do it. With Wolfe, it means he's listening to the shape of your sentences. "All right," I told her. "Start at the anonymous note. Work forward, names, times, what was eaten, who was where. Don't save the embarrassing parts for last. They spoil." She was a good witness. She had the PR habit of telling a story like it's a press release that forgot it's not supposed to sound personal, but she cut the fluff when I asked her to. 2 weeks ago, the first note at the restaurant addressed to whom it may concern. Murder in the mashed potatoes. The tasting dinner last night was a fundraiser on top of a showcase. 6 courses, 60 covers, donors and writers, and 2 minor celebrities who let the staff act impressed. Who was in the kitchen? I asked. Chef Aldo Roscani, supervising. Tamara Lean as sous chef, the usual line cooks. Felix Curion managing the floor with Pia Delgado as service captain. And Mr. Vine's table? Table 14. He prefers to be served last. Says it gives him time to observe other diners' reactions. Marie Tessier was his server. She's been with us 3 years, very reliable. I made notes while she painted the picture. Vine had been animated before the collapse, talking about a revelation in the making and checking his watch as if expecting something to happen. When it did happen, 2 bites of the potato course, a sharp intake of breath, face going white, legs giving out, he'd seemed more frustrated than frightened. Frustrated how? I asked. He kept saying it wasn't supposed to happen like this. As if someone had changed the rules of a game he thought he understood. Wolfe opened his eyes to look at that line again, as if it had been printed on the office rug. The doorbell rang. I went out because Fritz was making penance in the kitchen, and I didn't want him answering the door with a carving knife. When I opened it, the cigar hit me before the man did. Inspector Kramer keeps an unlit cigar in his mouth the way other men keep a wedding ring on. It's not decorative, it's a condition. Goodwin, he said. He in? He always is, I said. But you were told. Yeah, lunch. He shouldered past. It's the damnedest thing when poison gets fashionable. It always happens when Wolfe is chewing. We did not go near the dining room. We went to the office, where Miss Arkwright was automatically tenser, and Wolfe was not. Inspector, Wolfe said, you are uninvited. Kramer planted himself in his usual spot, the edge of the rug that has never been stained by an officer's shoe because Wolfe has gods he respects. You've got a client, he said, nodding at Miss Arkwright. And a case. Don't play coy. Rustermans called it in. Last night, we kept it quiet because we don't arraign dining rooms. Then at 10 o'clock this morning, we hear Miss Arkwright here took a trip, and your boy on the phone tells her to respect your lunch. Wolfe shut his eyes again. Chew alone. Kramer flexed the cigar between his teeth and looked at me. What do you have? And don't give me nothing. If there's 1 ounce of something, I'll weigh it. Anonymous notes before and after, I said. A prediction nobody believed, and a second one that told Miss Arkwright to come here at 1:30 because we'd be prepared. I let that float. Also, a bell we don't like being rung. She bring the notes? He held out a hand that had pushed open plenty of doors. I looked at Wolfe. He didn't nod. He rarely does. He said, copies. I gave Kramer copies. He looked at them like they owed him money, then turned to Miss Arkwright. You told us last night about the collapse. You didn't tell us about the note. Because it seemed ridiculous, she said, and it didn't sound like an excuse, just a fact. I was trying to prevent panic. Yeah, well, we like ridiculous with our coffee. He turned back to me. Any of Wolfe's spices been scribbled in? I kept my face blank. That's a creative image, Inspector. He looked past me to Wolfe. What's your angle? You've got a thing about Rustermans that makes you sentimental. Don't tell me you're doing charity. Wolfe opened his eyes. The sanctity of my house has been violated, he said. I will not have it. If you wish to assist me in restoring it, sit down. If you wish to hinder me, stand where you are and exhaust yourself. Kramer grunted. What do you mean, violated? Language, Wolfe said. A message was written in my lunch. Kramer's head came around to me so fast the cigar nearly kept going. What? In the mashed potatoes, I said. Murder, all caps, finger style. In Fritz's kitchen or near enough. Kramer swore with affection. You're telling me someone got into this house and wrote a valentine in your starch? Before we were at table, I corrected, while Fritz was fetching mustard. 10 seconds. Goodwin, Wolfe said, and I stopped. You will call Mr. Curien. Tell him he and Chef Roscani will attend us here at 4. If he balks, tell him I will telephone him myself. Kramer barked. You will not set up a parade in this office for my witnesses. They are not yours, Wolfe said. You do not even know their names. I called Felix Curien. He answered with a voice that could shush a hurricane. When I told him he and Chef Roscani were invited to call at 4, he managed to make yes sound like I'd asked him to donate blood. Miss Arkwright stood. Do you want me to stay? She asked. No, Wolfe said. Go. Keep your staff intact and available. Do not speak to the press. Say Mr. Vine suffered an episode and is receiving care. She nodded and went out with the air of someone who knows she's about to manage a fire with bottled water. When she was gone, Kramer leaned. Forward. All right, Wolfe. Cards on the table. Someone poisoned a food critic at your pet restaurant, then broke into your house to write about it in your lunch. That's not coincidence. That's choreography. Indeed, Wolfe said. Someone wishes my attention. They have it. And they'll have mine too. I want to know who had access to both kitchens. As do I, Wolfe said. Which is why Mr. Curien and Chef Roscani will come here, where I can observe them properly. I looked at my watch. That gives us an hour to prepare. What do you want me to do? Call Saul. Tell him to be ready, but do not engage him yet. Then call the hospital and inquire about Mr. Vine's condition. Be persistent, but not obvious. And the nutmeg jar? I asked. Wolfe's eyes opened fully for the first time since lunch. Dust it for fingerprints, carefully. Fritz will show you how he arranged it originally. Kramer stood up. I'll be back at 4, he said. Don't start without me. We would not dream of it, Wolfe told him. After Kramer left, I found Fritz in the kitchen, still looking like a man whose cathedral had been vandalized. The nutmeg jar sat on its shelf, label forward, but when I looked closely, I could see the smudges where it had been turned and turned back. Fritz, I said, show me exactly how you left this jar before lunch. He positioned it with the precision of a jeweler setting a stone. Just so. Always just so. The label faces out. The cap is tight. It sits between the cinnamon and the cardamom. I dusted it carefully with the kit we keep for such occasions. 3 clear prints on the sides, different from Fritz's careful fingertips. Someone had indeed turned it, and they'd left their signature. When I came back to the office, Wolfe was sitting with his eyes closed, but I could tell he wasn't napping. His fingers were making tiny circles on the arm of his chair, which is how he thinks when he's got all the pieces of a puzzle but hasn't figured out how they fit. Well, he said without opening his eyes. 3 prints, not Fritz's. Saul is standing by. The hospital says Mr. Vine is stable, but not talking to visitors, and Felix Curien sounded like a man who's been asked to bring his execution to a hanging. Good, Wolfe said. At 4 o'clock, we shall see what our uninvited choreographer has arranged for the second act. I settled at my desk to wait. Outside, the afternoon was getting on, and inside, the brownstone felt like a theater between performances. Someone had written us into their script, and Wolfe, in his chair, was preparing to rewrite the ending. The only question was whether our mysterious playwright would be in the audience to watch. At 4 sharp, the bell announced the outer world had put on a tie. I was in the hall to receive it, since Fritz had taken up station in the kitchen like a man guarding a reliquary. Felix Curien came in first, wearing black like a mood, with a tie that would have impressed a mortgage broker and shoes that could have shaved you. Behind him was Chef Aldo Roscani, square as a stove and moving with the confident economy of a man who has spent decades turning heat into applause. Mr. Goodwin, Felix said, like he was greeting a concierge in Paris. His glance skimmed the hall, the oriental runner, the polished banister. I apologize for the intrusion. That makes us even, I told him and showed them to the office. Wolfe didn't rise, and if you were new to our floor plan, you might have thought he'd been installed with the house. He gave Felix a nod he reserves for men who keep order in a room where food is served, and Chef Roscani got a longer look, not out of courtesy, but because Wolfe is sentimental about craftsmen. "Mr. Curion, Chef, Mr. Wolfe," Felix said. He sat with minimal cloth disturbance. The chef remained standing a second, then took the red leather chair with a huff that was not indignation, merely the sound a bear makes when it decides not to maul you. Kramer arrived a minute later without knocking, which is his way of reminding us that warrants are for people who haven't worn out rugs on merit. The cigar was in place, unlabeled and unlit, like the law in his mouth. "Everyone comfy?" he asked, and planted himself where he could see all the faces and none of the walls. Wolfe leaned his head back and let his lids droop. "We will not waste time," he said. "Mr. Curion, tell me about last night's second course. What was it precisely? Who prepared it? Who plated it? Who served it to Mr. Vine?" Felix didn't look to the chef. The chef looked to Felix. That told me they knew who ran what. "The course was pomme puree with brown butter and shaved truffle," Felix said. "A classic, refined for the season. Nutmeg, yes. A whisper." Chef Roscani supervised the path. The line plated. Sous Chef Tamara Lin finished the butter. Service Captain Pia Delgado called the fires. Server Marie Tessier delivered to table 14, Mr. Vine's table. "Thank you," Wolfe murmured. "Chef, do you object to any of that?" Roscani spread his hands, thick and bone-glossed, the nails trimmed like a habit. "It is correct," he said. The voice was gravel with garlic. "It is a potato. You cannot poison a man with a potato. Not like that. We used the same pan, the same spoon. If there was something wrong, it was not in my kitchen." "Careful," Kramer said. "You don't get credit for excluding yourself." "I'm not excluding myself," Roscani shot back, lifting his chin. "I'm telling you the fact. We plated 60. One man collapses. That is not a batch problem. That is a plate problem. It is also," Felix put in smoothly, "a perception problem, which we are handling." "Phooey," Wolfe said gently, though the PFUI had a little edge for PR. "Mr. Curion, does Mr. Vine have any special preferences or allergies?" Felix's face did a small thing. "He dislikes nutmeg," he said. "He says it masks the purity of the potato." "Dislikes," Wolfe repeated. "Not a physiological allergy." "Not that we know," Felix said. "He has eaten at Rusterman's regularly for years. He informs us of his preferences. He keeps no EpiPen at his table." Chef Roscani's jaw bunched. "He tells us not to use nutmeg, then he complains a dish lacks personality. He wanted to bully us into cooking like him." "You served him the dish with nutmeg?" I asked. For the first time, the chef hesitated. Felix cleared his throat. "No," he said. Per his standing note, his plate was finished without nutmeg. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Ah," he said. "So there were two preparations of the dish. One general, one particular. Who oversaw Mr. Vine's?" The chef's lips thinned. "I told Tamara, Miss Lin, to finish table 14 without the spice." Kramer turned to me. "Make a note." "A special plate." "I've got it." "Star, underline, and a paperclip," I said. Wolfe folded his hands. "Describe the chain of custody for Mr. Vine's plate." Felix could have drawn it with string. "Potato puree from the bain-marie, finished to order with brown butter. Truffles shaved. For Mr. Vine, no nutmeg." Tamara signaled the plate. Chef inspected. The plate went to the pass. Pia called 14 up. Marie took it. "Did the plate ever leave your sight, Chef?" Wolfe asked. "Between my eyes and the pass, no," Roscani said. "After the pass, it is Pia's world." "Did it leave yours, Mr. Curion?" Felix allowed himself a ghost of a smile, only to go where it was meant. I do not carry plates. I carry expectations. Who could have altered it on the pass? Kramer growled. Could anyone reach in and sprinkle anything while it's sitting there? Not without being seen, Felix said promptly. We run a tight pass. Pia stands at the mouth like Cerberus. She'll be enjoying that, I remarked. Felix's eyes flicked to me, amused despite himself. She does not enjoy metaphors. She agrees with clocks. There was a rap at the open door like a person apologizing for existing. A woman in a white jacket stepped into the frame. I didn't have to ask who she was. The burn along the ridge of her index finger and the way her stance guarded space she didn't own told me sous chef. She was mid-30s, hair in a no-nonsense knot, eyes that had discovered everything twice and were willing to find it again if necessary. Mr. Currion, she said to Felix, not to Wolfe or me. You didn't tell me you were coming here. Felix lifted a hand. Tamara, this is... I know who this is, she said, and looked at Wolfe with a contained curiosity that put her halfway to a seat and kept her standing. Mr. Wolfe, I'm Tamara Lynn. I thought you would want to hear me say Chef told me to hold the nutmeg on 14. I plated it, I handed it to the pass, and I watched Marie take it. Come in, Wolfe said. Sit. She sat on the edge of a chair like it might spring. The chef made a sound that wasn't words. Felix gave him a pacifying sliver of palm. Miss Lynn, Wolfe said, why did you come? Because I don't like other people speaking for me, she said. And because when something goes wrong in a kitchen, the sous pays with interest. You're not wrong, I told her, and she gave me a flick that might later bloom into a smile if circumstances improved. Tell me about Mr. Vine, Wolfe said, your relationship with him. I don't have relationships with critics, she said. He wrote a profile 2 years ago that mentioned me as competent. It was accurate and unhelpful. He came to the counter once to tell me I'd oversalted a celery root. I thanked him because I am professional. And last night, I was busy, she said. He was at 14. He said something to Marie at the pass that made her laugh. She doesn't laugh easy during service. What did he say? Kramer asked. I didn't hear words. I saw a face. It wasn't a kind joke. Chef Roscani shifted. He liked to bait. It's part of his show. Who else had reason to resent him? I asked. Pick a name, Felix said smoothly. He had made and broken careers with adjectives. Chef Roscani because he doesn't like being told to modernize. Tamara because competent is an insult in a city that prefers prodigies. Pia because he calls front of house waiters with agendas. Marie because he once wrote a piece that suggested servers flirt for tips and used an anecdote from Rustermans that sounded uncomfortably like her. Did she complain? Kramer asked. She threatened to quit, Felix said. I told her if she did, I would hire her back the next day after she considered her rent. She stayed. How about you, Mr. Currion? I put in. Did he ever slam the way you run the room? Felix's lips curved half a degree. He once told me my voice could curdle fondue. I considered it an evaluation. Wolfe's forefinger made a small journey on the chair arm. Miss Lynn, he said, did you ever visit this house? Her brow jumped. No. Mr. Currion? Felix blinked, then inclined his head. Years ago, when Mr. Wolfe consulted for Rustermans during the reopening. I've not been in your kitchen. Chef? Wolfe asked. Roscani looked offended by the invitation. I cook where I'm employed. Good, Wolfe said. The person who violated my kitchen today was not a stranger to kitchens. They moved quickly, left a legible word without a mess, and turned a jar label to the wall. That last is a habit, not an accident. Felix couldn't help himself. His gaze flitted to my bookcase, where I'd left a volume of starred reviews cocked a degree off to watch him twitch. He didn't twitch. He regarded it, then me. You think it was one of us? I think it was someone who knows what a kitchen is and isn't, Wolfe said, and who wishes me to yoke your trouble to mine. I'm harnessed. Now, describe the minutes before the collapse. They did it together, which told me they had done it already for each other and for someone with a notebook. Service captain calls. Plates go. Vine raises his fork. He speaks to his tablemate, a magazine publisher with an admirable chin. He eats 2 bites. He lifts a hand, like he's going to make a point, and grabs his throat instead. The doctor at table 3, analogist, irony as a comedian, administers an injection. Ambulance. Quiet. The kind that gets loud inside people's heads. Hospital says stable, I reported. Non-committal on cause. Anaphylaxis, Tamara said. They used EPI. He'd never had a reaction like that with us. Would he have eaten something before the second course that could trigger it? I asked. Shellfish in the first, Felix said. He eats shellfish. He lives on shellfish. If he were allergic to it, we would have known before now. Wolfe cut in. Mr. Currian, Miss Lynn, you will both return to Rustermans and maintain the routines exactly as they were last night. Do not dismiss staff. Do not alter stations. Miss Delgado and Miss Tessier will be available to Mr. Goodwin this evening at 7. If you warn them only that I am not the police and that lying to me is less profitable than lying to Inspector Kramer. Kramer took out the cigar, which means he's about to set a perimeter. I'll have a man on the door, he said to Felix. If anyone on your staff tries to leave the city, you'll hear me knock for a change. Felix stood. We are not rats leaving a ship, he said mildly. We are professionals boarding one. Chef Roscani rose with him. He looked at Wolfe as if he wished Wolfe would stand so he could measure him. Wolfe spared him by remaining seated. If you find someone in my kitchen did this, Roscani said, I will fire them myself. You may be given the opportunity, Wolfe said. After they left, the room felt like a plate that had lost its sauce. Tamara had lingered half a beat at the door. I caught her eye and said, 7. 7, she echoed, and was gone. Kramer planted the cigar again. All right. 5 names with hands on the plate. Roscani, Lynn, Delgado, Tessier, and Currian on the room. Plus your PR woman who brought you notes like a breadbasket. Motives everywhere. Means scattered around the pass. And a poet in your potatoes. Not a poet, Wolfe said. A director. Same difference in this town, I said. Wolfe closed his eyes and finally, rang for coffee. Archie, glasses of water for our visitors yielded. I looked at the tray. I'd set water for Felix and the chef and had the satisfaction of seeing condensation and prints. Felix drank, chef didn't. Tamara touched the back of the chair and kept her hands to herself. Take what you can. Send them to Saul, Wolfe said. At 7, take Miss Lynn's measure and Miss Delgado's. Note Miss Tessier's nerves. Bring me their contradictions and a copy of Mr. Vine's last 2 columns. And the potatoes? I asked. He let out a breath through his nose, which is as close as he gets to a sigh. Let them stand, he said. I may wish to look again. At the word or the butter? At the finger, he said. It had practice. At 6:30, I had a copy of the Times folded to Gordon Vine's latest column and a head full of his adjectives, none of which would improve your digestion. The man wrote with a scalpel dipped in lemon juice, and his last piece had been particularly surgical. A new bistro on the Upper East Side had been dissected under the headline, Ambition Served Cold, with Vine concluding that the chef mistakes complexity for sophistication and noise for music. 2 weeks earlier, he'd written a teaser about upcoming reckonings for establishments that coast on reputation while their standards slip like a waiter on wet marble. Rustermans wasn't named, but Vine had a gift for pointing without pointing. Saul called at 6:45 with the voice he reserves for complications. 3 clear prints on that nutmeg jar, Archie. None match Fritz, as expected. One set shows a distinctive crescent-shaped nick at the base of the left index finger. Old scar, maybe a knife slip. Another set is smaller, narrow fingertips, very clean. The third shows burn scarring typical of kitchen work, blunt pads. I'll need comparison prints to make identifications. I'm headed to a convention of hands, I told him. I'll bring you a collection. And Archie? Whoever turned that jar knew what they were doing. The prints are positioned exactly where you'd grip to rotate it. This wasn't accidental contact. Rustamens at 7 had the controlled energy of a theater just before curtain. The dinner crowd was settling in with the confidence of people who believe good food can solve most of life's problems, and the staff was moving with a precision that keeps that belief intact. Felix materialized at the Maître D station like he'd been conjured by reservation books and good intentions. "Mr. Goodwin," he said with a nod that conveyed both welcome and wariness. "Pia is at the pass. Tamara is in prep. Marie is in the staff room, and she's been informed you wish to speak with her." "Thoughtful of you," I said. "I'll try not to disrupt the symphony." I found Pia Delgado stationed at the pass like a general surveying a battlefield she intended to win. She was mid-40s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of posture that comes from years of carrying other people's expectations without dropping them. Her eyes missed nothing, cataloging plates, servers, and the rhythm of service with the precision of a metronome. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, without taking her attention from a plate of something that smelled like heaven had learned to cook. "Mr. Currian said you would want to discuss last evening." "Just a few questions about the pass," I said, positioning myself where I wouldn't interfere with the flow. "You mentioned that Mr. Vine's plate went straight from kitchen to table." "No delays, no adjustments." "None," she said, her eyes tracking a server's path across the dining room. "Tamara finished the plate. Chef approved it. I called 14 up. Marie took it directly to table. 30 seconds, perhaps less." "Anyone else near the pass during that time?" "The usual traffic. Line, cooks, runners, servers picking up their tables. But no one touched 14. I would have seen it. I watched her hands as she gestured, large for a woman, competent, with a thin white line across the base of her left index finger. Not a crescent, more like the memory of a blade. "You had any recent accidents with knives?" She glanced at me with the look of someone who's been asked if water is wet. "I work in a restaurant, Mr. Goodwin. Cuts are occupational hazards. This one's from last month. Paring knife slipped while I was showing a new server proper garnish technique." "And Mr. Vine? Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior before the collapse?" For the first time, her attention fully focused on me. "He was animated, more talkative than usual. He said something to his table mate about delicious irony and checked his watch several times. He seemed to be expecting something. I made a note and moved on to find Tamara Lynn in the prep kitchen, a fluorescent-lit cave where vegetables surrendered their identities to become something greater. She was at a cutting board, reducing onions to geometric perfection with a knife that moved like it was powered by her pulse. "Miss Lynn." She looked up, set the knife down with the blade facing away from both of us, and wiped her hands on her apron. The burn scar on her index finger caught the light, a ribbon of glossy skin that spoke of years around hot surfaces. "Mr. Goodwin, you're punctual." "It's a character flaw," I said. "Tell me about plating Mr. Vine's dish last night." "Standard preparation, modified per his standing instructions. No nutmeg." I reached for the grinder out of habit on the first few plates, but caught myself. Pia gave me a look that could have curdled cream. "Any interruptions while you were working?" She paused, knife hovering over an onion. The truffle shaver was moved. I keep it blade back, handle at the edge. Someone had turned it blade forward. Took me half a second to correct it. Could that half second have given someone access to Vine's plate? Not without Pia seeing. She watches that pass like it's the crown jewels. Tamara's hands were steady, professional, with a small nick under the thumb pad. The kind you get when your blade slips and you pretend it didn't happen. Besides, the plate went straight from my hands to hers to Marie's. Chain of custody was clean. I found Marie Tessier in the staff room, looking like someone who'd been expecting bad news and was relieved to see it was only me. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back severely, and brown eyes that suggested the world didn't always take her as seriously as she took it. "Miss Tessier?" "Archie Goodwin." "I know," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Felix said you'd want to talk about last night." I sat down on furniture designed by someone who believed comfort was a sign of weakness. "Tell me about serving Mr. Vine." "He was different," she said, immediately. "Usually he's all business, orders with modifications, barely looks at you, treats servers like furniture that happens to carry food. But last night he was almost playful." "Playful how?" "He winked at me when I brought the potato course." Actually winked. Said something about how I always brought him the best things, even when he didn't deserve them. He'd never said anything like that before. Her left index finger had a small crescent-shaped mark at the base, pale against her skin. Could have been anything. Fingers encounter sharp edges in restaurants. Did he say anything else? After he took the first bite, he nodded like he was satisfied. Then he took the second bite and she shuddered. He made this sound like he was choking. His face went white, then red, then white again. He pointed at his plate, at the potato specifically, and kept saying, "This isn't right. This isn't how it happens." Like he was expecting something different. Exactly. Like someone had changed the rules of a game he thought he understood. I collected water glasses from each of them with the casual efficiency of a man who believes hydration is important, then made my way back through the dining room. The evening service was in full swing, and watching it was like watching a ballet performed by people who knew that one wrong step could ruin someone's anniversary. Felix intercepted me near the door. "Learn anything useful, Mr. Goodwin?" "I learned that Mr. Vine was a man who made enemies for sport," I said, "and that last night he seemed to be enjoying a private joke." "That's not unusual," Felix said. "He often seemed amused by things the rest of us couldn't see. This was different, according to your staff. He was expecting something specific to happen." Felix's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Mr. Vine was a complicated man with complicated appetites. Perhaps he finally bit off more than he could chew. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office with a book on orchid cultivation and a glass of beer that had achieved the perfect temperature through patience and proper timing. He looked up when I entered, his eyes asking the question his voice didn't need to. "Everyone had motive," I reported, settling at my desk. "Tamara Lynn because he dismissed her as competent and undermined her chef. Marie Tessier because he used her in a piece about servers who trade smiles for tips. Pia Delgado because he regularly insulted front-of-house staff. But here's the interesting part. Vine was acting completely out of character, winking, joking, checking his watch like he was waiting for something. When he collapsed, he seemed more frustrated than frightened." "Frustrated," Wolfe repeated, setting down his beer with the precision of a man who respects both gravity and good brewing. Like someone had changed his script, and all three women had the opportunity. The plate passed through their hands in sequence, but Pia swears she was watching every second. The phone rang. Saul's voice was crisp with information. "Got preliminary results on those water glasses, Archie. The prints are clear enough for comparison. Want me to run them against what I found on the nutmeg jar?" "Do it," I said. "And Saul?" "Rush job." Wolfe's in one of his moods. "Understood. I'll have something for you within the hour." I hung up and looked at Wolfe, who had closed his book and was making small circles on the arm of his chair with his forefinger, his thinking gesture. "The fingerprints will tell us who violated your kitchen," I said. "But I'm more interested in why Vine seemed to be expecting trouble." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured. "A man who anticipates his own poisoning is either prescient or complicit. In Mr. Vine's case, I suspect the latter. You think he was in on it?" "I think Mr. Vine was a man who enjoyed orchestrating drama. The question is whether he intended to be the victim or merely the catalyst." Wolfe opened his eyes and looked at me with the expression he reserves for moments when the pieces of a puzzle are beginning to form a picture. "Tomorrow, Archie, you will visit Mr. Vine at the hospital. Find out what game he thought he was playing. And if he won't talk, then we shall make the game more interesting," Wolfe said, reaching for his beer. "Someone wrote murder in my mashed potatoes, Archie. They have my attention. Now they shall have my complete and undivided consideration." The phone rang again. Saul, with results that would either simplify everything or complicate it beyond recognition. "The Prince match, Archie," he said without preamble. "One of your restaurant ladies left her signature on Wolfe's nutmeg jar. The crescent-shaped nick belongs to Marie Tessier." I looked at Wolfe, who had heard enough of the conversation to raise an eyebrow. "Marie Tessier," I said, "the server who was humiliated in print and who received Vine's unusual attention last night." "Indeed," Wolfe said, and for the first time since lunch, he smiled. "Miss Tessier, it seems, has been keeping secrets. Tomorrow we shall invite her to share them." The brownstone settled into its evening quiet, but the silence felt different now, charged with the electricity of a case that was beginning to reveal its true shape. Someone had written us into their drama, and now we were about to rewrite the ending. At 9 the next morning, I was prepared to visit a man who had tried to turn dinner into theater, and instead got a starring role in his own medical emergency. St. Raphael's Hospital had the usual institutional smell, disinfectant trying to mask the lingering ghosts of human frailty. And Gordon Vine was in a private room that looked like it had been decorated by someone who believed comfort was a luxury sick people didn't deserve. He was propped against a battalion of pillows, an IV line taped to his hand, looking like a critic who had found something fundamentally wrong with the concept of mortality. His face still carried the pallor of a man who had spent the night wondering if his throat would remember how to stay open, but his eyes held the bright, calculating gleam of someone who was already composing his review of the experience. "Mr. Goodwin," he said when I appeared in the doorway. "I wondered when Nero Wolfe would send his emissary." "Did you?" I took the visitor's chair, which had been designed by someone who thought sitting should be mildly punitive. "That suggests you were expecting us." "I was expecting someone," he said, adjusting his position with the careful movements of a man who had learned not to take breathing for granted. "When you orchestrate a performance, you anticipate critics in the audience." There it was, laid out like place settings at a formal dinner. I opened my notebook. "You orchestrated what happened at Rusterman's?" Vine's smile was thin as paper and twice as sharp. "I arranged for certain revelations to occur, Mr. Goodwin. What I did not arrange was to spend the evening wondering if my esophagus would close permanently." He told it like a man confessing to a crime he was proud of committing, right up until it went wrong. The anonymous notes about murder in the mashed potatoes had been his creation, designed to create tension and anticipation. His plan was elegantly simple. He would eat the potato course, experience a mild theatrical reaction, nothing dangerous, just enough to suggest contamination, and then reveal the evidence he had been gathering about declining standards at Rusterman's. "You were planning to fake a collapse?" I asked. "A controlled demonstration," he corrected with the precision of a man who believes words matter. "I had arranged for a harmless irritant to be introduced to my plate. Capsaicin, perhaps, or a mild allergen that would cause discomfort, but no real harm. The goal was to create a moment of dramatic irony, the critic becoming the victim of the very standards he was questioning. Who was your accomplice? For the first time, his confidence flickered. Someone who understood the artistic necessity of the gesture. Someone who felt constrained by their current circumstances and saw this as an opportunity for liberation. Marie Tessier, I said, watching his face. His eyes widened, and for a moment, the theatrical mask slipped entirely. Marie? No, that's impossible. She was merely the delivery mechanism. She couldn't have orchestrated this level of sophistication. Her fingerprints were on a nutmeg jar in Nero Wolfe's kitchen yesterday, I said. Someone wrote murder in his mashed potatoes using the same word from your anonymous notes. Vine looked genuinely stunned, like a playwright discovering that the actors had rewritten his script without telling him. This wasn't supposed to involve Wolfe. Marie was supposed to introduce a mild irritant. I was supposed to react dramatically but safely, and then we would reveal the truth about Rusterman's declining standards. It was meant to be a statement about culinary integrity, not attempted murder. But someone turned your theatrical gesture into the real thing, I said. Precisely. He leaned back against the pillows, looking suddenly exhausted. I took 2 bites of that potato course and immediately knew this wasn't my planned reaction. My throat began to close, my vision blurred, and I realized someone had taken my carefully orchestrated drama and turned it into something genuinely lethal. I left him with his regrets and his IV drip and drove back to the brownstone with the uncomfortable feeling that someone was taking entirely too much interest in my route. The gray sedan that picked me up 2 blocks from the hospital was being driven by someone who had learned surveillance from a correspondence course. Too close in traffic, too obvious at the lights, too interested in my turn signals. I led him on a brief tour of Manhattan's one-way streets before calling Saul to take over the tail. Then I headed home to report to Wolfe, who was in the office with a book on orchid cultivation and the expression of a man who was beginning to take this case personally. Vine planned a stunt, I reported, settling at my desk. He wanted to fake a mild reaction to make a point about restaurant standards. Instead, someone used his plan as cover for actual attempted murder. And the violation of my kitchen? He swears he never mentioned you to anyone, but someone wanted to make sure you got involved, and they used his own phrase, murder in the mashed potatoes, to get your attention. Before Wolfe could respond, Theodore's voice came down from the plant rooms with the kind of urgency that suggests orchids are in mortal peril. Mr. Goodwin, someone has been at the humidistat. I took the stairs 2 at a time. Theodore was standing by the environmental controls, pointing at the humidity dial like it had personally offended him. It was set to 45%, he said, his voice cracking with indignation. 45? My phalaenopsis would have been crisp by afternoon. The dial had been moved and moved back. The dust pattern betrayed it, showing where it had been sitting versus where someone had turned it. Just like Fritz's nutmeg jar, just like the truffle shaver at Rusterman's. The same compulsive need to touch and adjust, then correct the arrangement. When did you notice it? I asked. This morning at 9:15. It was correct when I checked at 8. I went to prepare the fertilizer solution, and when I returned, he gestured helplessly at the dial. Back in the office, Wolfe's jaw was set in the way that means someone has pushed him past the point of professional interest into personal affront. Locks, he said. Call Mr. Hagedorn. Every lock in this house changed by 2 o'clock. The phone rang before I could reach for it. Saul, with information that made the morning even more interesting. Your friend in the sedan belongs to nobody nice, he reported. Rental car, paid cash through a shell company. He met a woman 3 blocks from the hospital. Brunette, 30s, white kitchen jacket. They exchanged envelopes and went their separate ways. I'm following her now. Kitchen whites, I repeated. Tamara Lynn. Could be. She's heading toward the restaurant district. I relayed this to Wolfe, whose forefinger had begun making small circles on the arm of his chair, his thinking gesture. "Miss Lynn meets with surveillance operatives on the morning my humidistat is tampered with," he mused, "and Mr. Vine claims innocence of any plot involving me. Someone is directing this performance, Archie, and they are not content to remain in the wings." The phone rang again. This time it was Fritz, calling from the hall because he wouldn't enter the office while there was active investigation occurring. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, his voice tight with controlled distress. "There is another envelope on the dining room sideboard. I did not place it there." "Bring it," Wolfe said. Fritz delivered it on a silver tray, as if it might explode if handled carelessly. The same block letters cut from magazines, the same methodical gluing, the same patient malice. Inside, one line. "At 7 tonight. A new course." Wolfe looked at the message the way he looks at a dish that has dared to call itself coq au vin without understanding what those words mean. "We are being invited to the next act," he said. "Very well. Archie, call Miss Tessier. Tell her to present herself here at 6 o'clock. If she objects, tell her that Mr. Vine is recovering and eager to discuss their collaboration. You think she'll come? She has already demonstrated her willingness to enter this house uninvited," Wolfe said. "Now we shall see if she has the courage to enter it by invitation." I made the call. Marie Tessier answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the strain of someone who had been expecting bad news and was almost relieved to hear it arriving on schedule. "Miss Tessier," I said. "Archie Goodwin, we need to see you at 6 o'clock this evening, Mr. Wolfe's office." There was a pause in which I could hear her calculating her options and finding them all expensive. "I'm working dinner service," she said finally. "Felix will manage without you," I said. "Mr. Vine is recovering nicely, by the way. He's been telling us about your collaborative project." Another pause, longer this time. 6 o'clock, she said, and hung up. I looked at Wolfe, who had closed his book and was regarding the dining room door where someone had written their message in his lunch 24 hours earlier. "She'll be here," I said. "Good," Wolfe said. "And Archie?" "Call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we will have revelations at 6, and if he wishes to make arrests at 7, he should attend promptly." The brownstone settled into the kind of quiet that precedes storms. Someone had been choreographing a drama that involved poisoning critics, violating kitchens, and threatening new courses. At 6 o'clock, we would find out whether Marie Tessier was the playwright or merely another actor following someone else's script. Either way, the performance was about to reach its climax, and Wolfe, in his chair, was prepared to write the final review. By 5:30, the locksmith had finished installing new hardware that gleamed with the satisfaction of a job done properly. The brownstone felt like a fortress that had learned from its mistakes. Wolfe tested each new key with the methodical attention he usually reserved for orchid cultivation. And Fritz had calmed to the point where he was only giving the spice rack suspicious glances every few minutes instead of every few seconds. Kramer arrived at 5:45 with his unlit cigar and the expression of a man who has been promised answers and intends to collect them. He planted himself on his usual section of rug and surveyed the office like a general preparing for a siege. "You said revelations at 6, he said without preamble. "I brought handcuffs and patience, but not much of the latter." "Admirable preparation," Wolfe replied, settling deeper into his chair. "You may need both." Marie Tessier arrived precisely at 6, which told me she was either naturally punctual or scared enough to follow instructions exactly. She had changed out of her server's uniform into a dark skirt and white blouse that made her look younger and more vulnerable. The crescent-shaped scar at the base of her left index finger was visible as she folded her hands in her lap. I showed her to the red leather chair, positioning her where Wolfe could observe her face without appearing to stare. She sat with the careful posture of someone who had rehearsed this moment and found all the rehearsals wanting. "Miss Tessier," Wolfe said, his voice carrying the deliberate cadence of a man who has already reached his conclusions and is now simply arranging the evidence for presentation. You have been manipulated. She blinked, not because the statement surprised her, but because he had started there instead of with accusations. Mr. Vine told me you would figure it out, she said quietly. He said Nero Wolfe doesn't take cases unless he intends to solve them completely. Mr. Vine said many things, Wolfe observed. Not all of them were true. Tell me about your arrangement with him. The story came out in careful, measured sentences. Vine had approached her 3 weeks earlier with what he presented as an opportunity for justice. He was planning to expose declining standards at Rusterman's through a dramatic but harmless demonstration. He needed someone on the inside, someone who could help him make his point without being dismissed as a publicity stunt. He promised me a recommendation, she said, her voice steady but strained. A real opportunity at a better restaurant. He said his review of my service would open doors I couldn't open myself. And the substance you were to introduce to his plate? Wolfe asked. Capsaicin powder, hot pepper extract. He showed me the vial. Tiny with a dropper cap. He said 1 drop on his potato course would cause discomfort, make him cough and flush, but nothing dangerous. He'd done it before at other restaurants when he needed to make a point about food safety. Kramer leaned forward. But that's not what happened. Her composure cracked slightly. No. When I went to put the drop on his plate, something was wrong. The vial looked different. Darker liquid. Different consistency. I should have stopped. Should have questioned it, but service was moving fast and Pia was watching the pass like a hawk. And I did what I was supposed to do. You administered what you believed to be harmless pepper extract, Wolfe said. Instead, you nearly killed him. Someone had switched the vials, she said, her voice rising slightly. Someone knew about our plan and used it to try to commit murder. I made notes while she painted the complete picture. The meeting with Vine, the careful planning, the moment of realization when his reaction was far more severe than anticipated. She had watched him turn blue, watched the paramedics work over him, knowing that whatever she had put on his plate was not what she had agreed to administer. The fingerprints on my nutmeg jar, Wolfe said, his tone conversational. You deny placing them there. I've never been in your kitchen, she said firmly. I've never been in this house before today. And yet the evidence suggests otherwise, Wolfe said. Your prints, along with those of Miss Delgado and Miss Lynn, were found on the jar that was turned from its proper position. Marie stared at him with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. That's impossible. Unless... Her eyes widened. Unless someone transferred them somehow. Indeed, Wolfe said. It is possible, though clumsy, to lift fingerprints and deposit them elsewhere. Our uninvited dramatist appears to favor theatrical gestures over elegant execution. The phone rang. Saul, with information that added another layer to our developing picture. The surveillance continues, he reported. Tamara Lynn met with the same operative again this afternoon. Different envelope exchange? The man is Randall Mott. Private investigator, works mostly insurance fraud and domestic cases. But here's the interesting part. The money's flowing the wrong direction. She's paying him, not the other way round. I relayed this to Wolfe, whose forefinger began making small circles on his chair arm. Miss Lynn is purchasing surveillance, he mused. The question is whether she is watching or being watched. There's more, Saul continued. I managed to get close enough to hear part of their conversation. She asked him about the schedule and whether everything was in place for 7. He confirmed and handed her what looked like a key. A key to what? I asked. Unknown. But she seemed very particular about how it should be used. Specific instructions about timing and placement. After I hung up, Wolfe turned his attention back to Marie. Miss Tessier, during your meetings with Mr. Vine, did you notice anyone else who might have overheard your conversations? She thought carefully. We were always careful to meet away from the restaurant. But, she paused, her brow furrowing. Tamara mentioned once that she'd seen me at the coffee shop on 72nd Street. She asked if I was meeting someone special. I told her it was just a friend. Did she press for details? No, but she seemed interested. She asked if my friend was in the restaurant business. I said no, which was true. Gordon never identified himself as a critic during our meetings. And Miss Delgado? Wolfe asked. What is your relationship with her? Professional. She's very exacting about service standards. She notices everything. If a water glass is placed wrong, if a napkin isn't folded properly. She has this compulsive need to correct things. Wolfe's eyes opened fully for the first time since Marie had arrived. Compulsive how? She can't leave things out of place. If she sees something turned the wrong way, she has to fix it immediately. It drives some of the staff crazy, but it's just how she is. The truffle shaver, I said, remembering Tamara's comment from the previous evening. She mentioned it had been turned blade forward instead of blade back. Marie nodded. That would bother Pia enormously. She'd have to correct it the moment she saw it. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting that several pieces of the puzzle had just clicked into place. Miss Tessier, you will remain here this evening. Do not answer the door. Do not accept phone calls. If you are innocent, and I believe you are, you represent a danger to our true orchestrator only as long as you remain available to contradict their narrative. What happens now? She asked. Now we attend the 7 o'clock performance our anonymous correspondent has arranged, Wolfe said. Archie, call Mr. Currian. Tell him we require a small modification to this evening's service. I made the call. Felix listened with his usual precise attention, agreed to each instruction, and then asked, Mr. Wolfe, will this evening's activities reflect poorly on Rusterman's reputation? If we succeed, Wolfe said, they will enhance it considerably. And the trap? I asked after hanging up. Simple and direct, Wolfe said. At 6:55, Mr. Currian will announce an unscheduled amuse-bouche to be sent from the pass to all tables. Nothing elaborate, a spoon of creme fraiche with chive oil. The purpose is to concentrate attention on the pass at precisely 7 o'clock. And then we observe. Miss Delgado will maintain her usual station. There will be one addition to the pass, a small empty ramekin positioned to the left of the garnish station. If anyone attempts to add or remove anything from that ramekin, they will find themselves explaining their actions to Inspector Kramer and Mr. Panzer. Kramer grunted. That's your big plan? A dish and hope? Plus knowledge, Wolfe said. Our orchestrator is compulsive about order and correction. They cannot resist adjusting things that appear out of place. They will approach that ramekin because it represents disorder in their carefully controlled environment. When they do, we will have them. I looked at my watch. That gives us 40 minutes to get into position. Indeed, Wolfe said, rising from his chair with the deliberate movements of a man who has set all the necessary wheels in motion. Archie, take Inspector Kramer to Rusterman's. Position Mr. Panzer at the bar with clear sight lines to the pass. Tell Mr. Currian to keep Chef Roscani in the kitchen. He blusters, and I wish this done quietly. And you? Kramer asked. I will remain here, Wolfe said, doing what I always do. Thinking, and waiting for you to bring me the person who dared to write messages in my food. As we prepared to leave, Marie looked up from her chair with the expression of someone who has just realized she's been cast in a play she didn't audition for. Mr. Wolfe, she said, what if you're wrong? Then we will have an interesting evening, he replied. But I'm not wrong, Miss Tessier. Someone has been directing this performance from the beginning, using you and Mr. Vine as unwitting actors. At 7 o'clock, they will step onto the stage themselves, and when they do, the curtain will fall on their final act. The brownstones settled into expectant quiet as we left for Rusterman's. Outside, the evening air carried the promise of revelation, and I found myself looking forward to seeing how Wolfe's psychological mousetrap would spring. Someone had violated the sanctity of his kitchen, manipulated his lunch, and drawn him into their drama. In 20 minutes, they would discover that Nero Wolfe, when properly motivated, writes better endings than they do. Rustermans at 7 o'clock hummed with the controlled energy of an establishment that had survived worse scandals than anonymous notes and critic collapses. The dining room glowed with amber light and quiet conversation, servers moving like dancers who had rehearsed their steps until muscle memory took over. I positioned myself at a corner table with a clear view of the pass, where Pia Delgado commanded her station, with the focused intensity of a general directing a siege. Kramer had stationed himself near the host's stand, his unlit cigar and watchful eyes making him look like a man who was either waiting for a table or preparing to make arrests. Saul occupied a bar stool with perfect sight lines to the kitchen entrance, nursing a glass of something pale while his attention catalogued every movement in the service corridor. The trap was set. Felix had positioned the empty ramekin exactly where Wolfe had specified, slightly left of the garnish station, clean and purposeless, a small disruption in the careful geometry of the pass. To most observers, it would appear to be simply another piece of service equipment awaiting its role. But to someone with a compulsive need to maintain order, it represented an intolerable flaw in an otherwise perfect system. At 6:55, Felix made his announcement with the practiced grace of a man who had spent decades making diners feel special. Ladies and gentlemen, Chef Roscani has prepared a special amuse-bouche this evening. Creme fraiche with chive oil, compliments of Rustermans. The kitchen responded with increased activity. Servers gathered at the pass. Small spoons appeared on trays, and the machinery of fine dining shifted into a higher gear. I watched the ramekin, waiting for someone to notice its deliberate incorrectness. Tamara Lynn emerged from the prep kitchen at 6:58, carrying a tray of garnished containers. She moved with her usual efficiency, setting items in their designated positions, her eyes automatically scanning the arrangement of the pass. When her gaze reached the empty ramekin, she stopped. For a moment, she simply stared at it, her brow furrowing with the expression of someone who had discovered a misplaced comma in an otherwise perfect sentence. She looked around the pass, checking to see who might be watching. Pia was directing the plating of the amuse-bouche, calling out table numbers with military precision. The other staff members were focused on their immediate tasks. Tamara approached the ramekin. She reached for it with the inevitable motion of someone correcting an obvious mistake. Her burned fingers, scarred from years of kitchen work, closed around the small dish. She lifted it, preparing to relocate it to what she considered its proper position. That's when I moved. "Miss Lynn," I said, appearing at her shoulder with the casual authority of someone who had been expecting exactly this moment. "I think you should leave that exactly where it is." She froze, the ramekin suspended in her hands, her face cycling through surprise, confusion, and finally a kind of weary resignation. Around us, the evening service continued its choreographed dance, but in our small circle of space, time had crystallized into a moment of truth. Kramer materialized beside us, with the inevitability of gravity. "Miss Lynn," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had been waiting for this scene to unfold. "We need to talk." Saul appeared at her other side, his movement so smooth it seemed like he had simply materialized from the restaurant's shadows. "The ramekin, please," he said, producing an evidence bag from his jacket pocket. Tamara looked down at the small dish in her hands as if seeing it for the first time. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "This isn't what you think it is." "Then explain it to us," I said, taking the ramekin from her unresisting fingers and passing it to Saul. "Start with why you couldn't leave it out of place." The conversation that followed took place in Felix's office, a small space behind the host stand that was furnished with the understated elegance that suggested money without announcing it. Tamara sat in a chair designed for brief meetings, her chef's jacket suddenly looking too large for her frame, her hands folded in her lap like a student called before the principal. "The compulsion to correct disorder," I said, settling across from her with my notebook. "Wolfe predicted it. You couldn't leave that ramekin out of place any more than you could leave a stove burner on or a knife blade facing the wrong direction." She looked up at me with eyes that held the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a secret too heavy for one person to bear. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, her voice steady but strained. "To watch standards slip, to see a place you care about lose its way because no one will acknowledge the problems." "So you decided to create a crisis," Kramer said, positioning himself where he could observe her face. "Use Vine's publicity stunt as cover for something more serious." "It wasn't supposed to be attempted murder," she said, the words coming out in a controlled rush. "The bee venom was calculated. I researched his weight, his medical history, his previous reactions. It should have caused anaphylaxis, yes, but survivable anaphylaxis. Dramatic enough to trigger investigations, reviews, changes in management, but not what actually happened." The story emerged in careful, methodical detail. Tamara had discovered Vine's arrangement with Marie through observation and strategic positioning during their meetings. She had seen the pattern, understood the plan, and decided to use it as cover for her own agenda. "Rustermans was dying," she said, her voice gaining strength as she explained her reasoning. Not obviously, not dramatically, but slowly. Standards were slipping. The kitchen was becoming complacent. Felix cared more about managing perceptions than maintaining excellence. Something needed to happen to shock everyone back to remembering what we were supposed to represent. "So you switched the vials," I said. "Marie thought she was administering harmless pepper extract, but you had substituted bee venom." "The morning of the dinner. I intercepted her at the staff entrance, distracted her for 30 seconds while I made the switch. She never knew. She thought she was participating in Vine's publicity stunt, but I was using her as an unwitting delivery system for something that would force real change." "And the messages in Wolfe's food?" Kramer asked. For the first time, she looked genuinely ashamed. "That was improvisation. I knew about his connection to Rustermans, his reputation for solving impossible cases. I wanted him involved because I knew he would uncover the truth, but I wanted him to uncover the right truth, that Rustermans needed to be saved from itself." "By breaking into his house," I said. "Twice. The first time was impulse. I got into the brownstone through the service entrance while Fritz was distracted by a delivery. I saw the mashed potatoes sitting there, and the phrase from the anonymous notes just appeared under my fingers. It seemed like perfect symbolism, murder in the mashed potatoes, the sacred and the profane mixing in Nero Wolfe's own dining room. And the second intrusion? The humidistat in the plant rooms. I needed to maintain pressure, keep Mr. Wolfe engaged. I thought if I could demonstrate that the threat was ongoing, that it extended beyond the restaurant, he would be more motivated to solve the case quickly. She paused, looking down at her hands. I also needed to establish a pattern that could be attributed to someone else's compulsive behavior. The pieces clicked into place with the satisfying precision of a well-made lock. "You were framing Pia," I said. "The turned nutmeg jar, the moved truffle shaver, the adjusted humidistat, all designed to exploit her known compulsion to correct disorder." "Pia notices everything," Tamara said. "She can't help herself. If she sees something out of place, she has to fix it immediately. I knew that if I created enough instances of tampering, the evidence would point to someone with obsessive-compulsive tendencies." "You hired Randall Mott to monitor our investigation," Kramer said, "to make sure we were focusing on the right suspects." She nodded. "I needed to know how close you were getting, whether you were looking in the right direction. When I realized you had identified Marie's fingerprints on the nutmeg jar, I knew I had to act quickly to redirect attention. by lifting prints from water glasses and transferring them. I said, clumsy, but effective enough to muddy the waters. It was desperation, she admitted. I was running out of time and the investigation wasn't going according to plan. I thought if I could implicate multiple people, create enough confusion, the focus would shift away from the real issue, the need to reform Rustamans from the ground up. I looked at my notes, then at Tamara, who sat in her chair like a chess player who had just realized she was in checkmate. You orchestrated an elaborate performance to save a restaurant by nearly destroying it. That's either dedication or delusion. It's love, she said simply. I've worked in kitchens my entire adult life. I know what excellence looks like, and I know what it costs to maintain it. Rusterman's was losing that excellence, one compromise at a time, and no one seemed to care enough to fight for it. So you decided to fight for it by committing attempted murder, Kramer said, standing and reaching for his handcuffs. Tamara Lynn, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Gordon Vine, breaking and entering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As Kramer led her away, Felix appeared in the doorway of his office, his usually composed expression showing cracks of genuine distress. The dining room beyond continued its evening rhythm, unaware that the crisis that had begun with anonymous notes and collapsed critics had just reached its resolution. "Mr. Goodwin," Felix said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had just watched his world shift on its axis. "Will Rustamans survive this?" "It'll survive," I told him, closing my notebook and preparing to return to the brownstone. "The question is whether it deserves to." I called Wolfe from the restaurant's phone to report the resolution. His voice carried the satisfaction of a man who had set a psychological trap and watched it spring exactly as predicted. "Miss Lynn's compulsion served her poorly," he observed. "She could not resist correcting disorder, even when that disorder was deliberate bait." "She genuinely believed she was saving the restaurant," I said. "Perhaps she was," Wolfe replied, his tone suggesting that he found the entire affair both predictable and slightly disappointing. Sometimes destruction and salvation are indistinguishable until the dust settles. "Come home, Archie. Fritz has prepared a late dinner, and I find I've recovered my appetite for properly prepared food." I walked out of Rusterman's into the cool evening air, leaving behind a dining room that was slowly returning to its normal rhythms. The crisis had passed, the truth had been revealed, and the machinery of fine dining would continue to operate. Whether it would operate better or worse remained to be seen. But that, as Wolfe would say, was someone else's problem. We had been hired to solve a mystery, and the mystery was solved. The rest was commentary, and commentary, unlike mashed potatoes, was not our responsibility to prepare. The brownstone was waiting, warm and well lit and properly secured with its new locks. Inside, Wolfe would be in his chair, probably with a book, and definitely with an opinion about the evening's events. And in the kitchen, Fritz would be preparing food that no one had written messages in. It seemed like an excellent way to end a day that had begun with anonymous threats and concluded with handcuffs. Some performances, I reflected as I hailed a taxi, are better watched from the audience than directed from the stage. The next morning at 11, the brownstone had returned to its proper function as a theater for the revelation of truth. The office held more people than it was designed for, but Wolfe's presence commanded enough space for everyone to find their proper place in the final act. Kramer arrived first, his unlit cigar and 2 detectives serving as advance notice that the law was prepared to collect its due. Tamara Lynn entered between them, no longer in chef's whites, but in the gray institutional clothing of someone whose choices had caught up with her. Felix Kurian and Chef Roscani followed, the maître d' maintaining his composure like armor, while the chef looked ready to break something with his bare hands. Lila Arkwright clutched a folder of prepared statements, though her eyes suggested she knew none of them would matter now. Pia Delgado stood with her usual perfect posture, as if she could balance the chaos of the morning through sheer force of will. Marie Tessier sat closest to my desk, pale but steady. finally understanding that she had been a player in someone else's game. The only absent party was present by telephone, a black instrument on the side table connected to Gordon Vine's hospital bed, where a nurse maintained the line with professional patience. Wolfe surveyed the assembled company with the satisfaction of a conductor facing a well-rehearsed orchestra. When the last chair had been claimed and the last throat cleared, he opened his eyes fully. "We proceed," he said, his voice carrying the deliberate cadence of a man who has arranged all the pieces and now intends to show how they fit together. "This gathering is not a court of law. It is a kitchen where we will examine the recipe for attempted murder and its various corrupted ingredients." Kramer shifted his weight, the cigar making a small journey between his teeth. He had learned not to interrupt Wolfe's presentations, but his patience had limits. 2 weeks ago, Wolfe continued, an anonymous note appeared at Rustermann's. "Murder in the mashed potatoes." It was not anonymous. "Mr. Vine, from your hospital bed, confirm your authorship." The telephone speaker crackled with Vine's voice, weakened but clear. "I created the notes as part of a planned demonstration. I intended no real harm, only theatrical criticism made manifest." "Theatrical indeed," Wolfe said, "but someone transformed your performance into genuine attempted murder. Miss Lynn, you replaced Mr. Vine's harmless capsaicin with bee venom, calculating that the allergist at table 3 could provide timely intervention." Tamara's voice was steady but hollow. "I researched the dosage. I studied his medical history. He should have survived with minimal lasting effects." "Should have," Wolfe repeated with distaste. "You gambled with a man's life to make a point about restaurant standards. But that was not your only transgression. You also violated my home. Twice." The room grew quieter, if such a thing were possible. Even Kramer leaned forward slightly. "The first intrusion occurred during lunch preparation. You entered through the service entrance while Fritz was distracted, wrote 'murder' in my mashed potatoes, and adjusted the nutmeg jar to create evidence of tampering. The second violation involved my plant rooms, where you altered the humidistat to maintain pressure and suggest an ongoing threat." Wolfe's forefinger made a small circle on his chair arm. "You also attempted to implicate others through transferred fingerprints. On my nutmeg jar, Mr. Panzer found 3 sets of prints. Yours, Miss Delgado's, and Miss Tessier's. The latter 2 had never been in my kitchen. You lifted their prints from water glasses and applied them using techniques learned from your paid surveillance operative, Mr. Randall Mott." Pia Delgado's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "I wondered why you suspected me of compulsive behavior. Your reputation for correcting disorder made you an ideal suspect," Wolfe said. "Miss Lynn exploited your known habits, just as she exploited Miss Tessier's involvement with Mr. Vine's original scheme." Marie spoke for the first time since entering. "I never knew about the bee venom. I thought I was helping with a harmless publicity stunt." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "You were an unwitting accomplice to Mr. Vine's deception and an unwitting delivery system for Miss Lynn's attempted murder. The law will distinguish between intention and manipulation in your case." Chef Roscani's chair creaked under his shifting weight. "She said she wanted to save the restaurant." "Save it from what?" "From complacency," Wolfe replied. Miss Lynn observed declining standards and decided that dramatic action was necessary to force reform. She convinced herself that near-fatal food poisoning would shock Rustermann's into renewed excellence. "And the trap last night?" Kramer asked. "The ramekin?" "Simple psychology," Wolfe said. "Miss Lynn cannot tolerate disorder. When presented with an object deliberately placed out of position, she was compelled to correct it. That compulsion, combined with the physical evidence Mr. Panzer had already gathered, provided the final confirmation of her guilt." Tamara looked up from her hands. "I couldn't let standards continue to slip. I watched the kitchen cut corners, saw management prioritize perception over quality. Someone had to act. Someone did, Felix said quietly. They acted by committing attempted murder and breaking into private homes. Your methods dishonored everything you claimed to protect. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then opened them to focus on Tamara. You possessed the dangerous combination of passionate conviction and limited imagination. You saw a problem and chose the most direct solution, regardless of moral or legal consequences. That is not dedication, it is fanaticism. The telephone crackled again. Mr. Wolfe. Vine's voice carried a note of grudging respect. Your analysis is comprehensive. I bear responsibility for creating the circumstances Miss Lynn exploited. You do, Wolfe agreed. Your publicity stunt was contemptible, designed to damage reputations for personal gain. However, you did not intend physical harm. Miss Lynn transformed your theatrical gesture into genuine attempted murder. Kramer stood, his patience finally exhausted. All right, enough philosophy. Lynn, you're under arrest for attempted murder, breaking and entering, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. He nodded to his detectives. Take her. As they led Tamara toward the door, she paused at the threshold. Mr. Wolfe, was there another way to save the restaurant? There is always another way, he replied without hesitation. And it is always more difficult than the path you chose. When the law had departed with its prisoner, the office breathed out slowly. Felix remained seated, looking as if he had aged a decade in the past hour. Mr. Wolfe, he said, your fee will be paid immediately. And I want you to know that we will implement real reforms, not the cosmetic changes Miss Lynn accused us of favoring. See that you do, Wolfe said. Miss Lynn's methods were criminal, but her observations about declining standards may have merit. Rusterman's reputation was built on excellence. Maintain it or lose it. Chef Roscani stood heavily. She was right about some things, he admitted. We had gotten comfortable. That ends now. After the restaurant staff departed, Marie lingered uncertainly. What happens to me? You will face charges, Wolfe said, not unkindly. But Mr. Kramer understands the difference between manipulation and malice. Consult an attorney, tell the truth, and accept responsibility for your poor judgment without claiming victimhood. When she had gone, the office settled into its familiar quiet. Fritz appeared with beer for Wolfe and coffee for me, his movement suggesting that the brownstone's equilibrium was finally restored. The locks held, I reported. No further intrusion. Good, Wolfe said, lifting his glass with the precision of a man who respects both gravity and proper brewing. The sanctity of this house has been restored, along with my appetite for properly prepared food. We dined early that evening. Fritz, in an act of either courage or defiance, prepared pomme puree alongside grilled trout with beurre blanc, so perfect it could have been used to set clocks. The potatoes were innocent of any message save the one Fritz intended, that food, properly prepared, needs no additional commentary. You were hard on Miss Lynn, I observed as we returned to the office afterward. I was accurate, Wolfe replied, settling into his chair with a book on orchid cultivation. She convinced herself that passion justified transgression, that love excused attempted murder. Such thinking is the foundation of fanaticism. And the restaurant? Will it actually improve? That remains to be seen. Fear of scandal may motivate temporary reform, but lasting excellence requires daily commitment to standards. Miss Lynn was correct about one thing. Institutions decay when they prioritize perception over performance. The brownstone settled into evening quiet, the kind of deep satisfaction that follows the successful resolution of complex problems. The case had begun with a violation of Wolfe's lunch and ended with justice properly served. Order had been restored, truth revealed, and the guilty appropriately punished. Next time, I said, preparing to lock up for the night, let's have murder in the meringue. It's lighter. Wolfe didn't open his eyes. "Leave meringue alone, Archie. It has enough problems maintaining its structure without adding homicide to the recipe." I climbed the stairs, leaving him to his final reflections on human folly and properly prepared food. The case was closed, the brownstone secure, and Nero Wolfe's world restored to its proper order. Tomorrow would bring new mysteries, but tonight the mashed potatoes were safe from literary vandalism. In the end, that might be the most important victory of all. A man's home is his castle, but his dining room is his sanctuary. Violate it at your peril, because somewhere in New York, a very large man with an exceptional mind takes such violations personally. And when Nero Wolfe takes something personally, justice is served with the same precision as his dinner, methodically, thoroughly, and with an appropriate respect for tradition. It rained the next day, not hard enough to ruin hats, but enough to put a sheen on sidewalks and give the brownstone an excuse to look smug about its weatherproofing. I was at my desk wrestling with invoices when Fritz delivered an envelope that had the kind of weight that makes accountants blink twice. Inside was a cashier's check from Rustermans, along with a note in Felix Curion's precise hand expressing gratitude that managed to sound both professional and genuinely relieved. Someone had added a postscript in blue ink. "No nutmeg will be harmed in the making of our future." "Deposit it," Wolfe said from his chair, not looking up from a column in the Times that had apparently offended his sensibilities. "Add an allowance for Fritz's distress and itemize Mr. Panzer separately." Fritz, passing through with an armload of parsley as green as good intentions, sniffed with dignity. "My distress requires no allowance. It requires assurance that no one will again write messages in my food." "You'll accept the allowance," Wolfe told him, which in this house counts as tenderness. At 11:30, Kramer called with updates delivered around his perpetual cigar. Lab confirmed bee venom on Vine's plate and in the switched vial. Lynn's cooperating now that her lawyer explained the alternatives. Mott rolled on the surveillance charges. We'll squeeze his license. Marie Tessier is looking at a misdemeanor. Ada's going soft considering she was manipulated. Your PR lady is already drafting statements about renewed commitments and lessons learned. "And Vine?" I asked. Aggrieved and alive, wants to be the victim and the hero of his own story. He's writing a piece about the experience. Says it's for personal reflection, not publication. I relayed this to Wolfe, who received it with the mild satisfaction of a man whose predictions about human nature had been confirmed. The afternoon brought a visit from Catherine Brennan of the Metropolitan Restaurant Association, a silver-haired woman with the quiet competence of someone accustomed to managing crises before they became headlines. She wanted to discuss prevention strategies, how to identify the warning signs of employee fanaticism before it escalated to criminal behavior. Miss Lynn's psychology was not complex, Wolfe told her, settling back in his chair. She possessed passionate convictions about culinary excellence coupled with limited imagination regarding appropriate methods of reform. The combination is more common than you might suppose. He outlined the progression with clinical precision. The dedicated employee who begins by pointing out infractions progresses to vocal criticism of management and eventually convinces themselves that extraordinary measures are justified by extraordinary circumstances. Communication, he concluded. Had management created channels for meaningful dialogue about quality concerns, Miss Lynn's frustrations might have found constructive outlet rather than criminal expression. Mrs. Brennan took careful notes and departed with the systematic approach of someone who intended to turn tragedy into policy. It was, I reflected, a more constructive response than most institutions managed. Later that afternoon, I took a detour past Rustermans on my way back from the bank. The lunch service was proceeding with the focused energy of an establishment that had survived scandal and intended to prove it deserved to. Pia Delgado commanded the pass with renewed authority. Chef Roscani was on the line with his sleeves rolled up, and Felix moved through the dining room with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to take smooth operations for granted. "We're implementing the reforms," Mr. Wolfe suggested. Felix told me quietly. "Weekly staff meetings, formal feedback protocols, additional kitchen support. We won't have another situation where legitimate concerns become criminal actions." That evening, Fritz prepared dinner with the visible satisfaction of a man whose kitchen had been cleansed of all unwelcome intrusions. The menu was deliberately ceremonial: roast chicken with herbs, pommes saladaises, and, as the centerpiece, mashed potatoes presented on a fresh, unblemished serving dish. Fritz set them down with the gravity of a priest placing communion wine on an altar. The surface was pristine, unmarked by human folly or malicious intent, smooth as Fritz's conscience and ridged in perfect symmetrical swirls. The aroma of butter and a whisper of nutmeg filled the dining room like incense. Wolfe received them with appropriate reverence. He spooned a generous portion onto his plate, his movements deliberate and contemplative, then took his first bite with eyes closed. The faint nod that followed wasn't just approval, it was absolution. We ate in the comfortable silence that follows the successful resolution of complex problems. The flavors were clean and honest, a stark contrast to the poisoned drama of recent days. This wasn't just food, it was a reaffirmation of the brownstone's integrity, a culinary declaration that sanity had returned. Only after the coffee had been served did Wolfe offer his final reflection on the case. He swirled the dark liquid in his demitasse, watching the patterns as if reading omens in the crema. The human appetite, Archie, is a peculiar thing. Not merely for sustenance, but for validation, for control, for what they perceive as justice. Miss Lynn believed she was nourishing a starving institution. She mistook destruction for reform, convinced that only catastrophic illness could cure what she saw as creeping malaise. He paused, taking a slow sip. She possessed the dangerous combination of passionate conviction and limited imagination. She saw problems, some of which may have been genuine, and chose the most direct solution, regardless of moral or legal consequences. It is the essence of fanaticism, the belief that noble ends justify ignoble means. His gaze drifted toward the dining room, then back to me. But excellence cannot be imposed through spectacle, Archie. Standards are not theater. They are habits. When they lapse, the only remedy is to resume them, daily, without applause or drama. Miss Lynn confused vigilance with violence, reform with revenge. He set his cup down with a soft click. She violated more than a man's health or a restaurant's reputation. She violated the fundamental agreements that make civilization possible. That food is nourishment, not weapon. That kitchens are sanctuaries, not stages for personal drama. That trust, once broken, is not easily restored. Wolfe leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking softly. The brownstone, however, is resilient. It has absorbed the shock, purged the poison, and returned to its proper function. The locks are changed, the routines restored, and the mashed potatoes. He glanced toward the empty serving dish, once again innocent of literary ambition. I nodded, understanding that this was more than case summary. It was philosophy. For Wolfe, the crime wasn't just attempted murder, but the disruption of order, the violation of sanctuary, the corruption of something pure and simple into something twisted and dangerous. "So all's well that ends well," I said, rising to gather the empty cups. Though I suspect Miss Lynn will have plenty of time to reconsider her recipe for reform, and I'll bet Vine thinks twice before ordering anything with delicious irony on the menu. Wolfe was already reaching for his book, the case officially closed in his mind. "Next time someone wishes to send me a message, Archie, suggest they use the telephone. It's less invasive than my lunch." I climbed the stairs, leaving him to his final reflections on human folly and properly prepared food. The brownstone settled into its evening quiet, the kind of deep satisfaction that follows the restoration of proper order. Tomorrow would bring new mysteries, but tonight the mashed potatoes were safe from literary vandalism. In the end, perhaps that's what justice looks like in Nero Wolfe's world. Not the elimination of all problems, but the proper response. When problems become crimes, when passion becomes fanaticism, when someone mistakes their personal drama for universal truth. Miss Lynn had seen real issues and chosen criminal solutions. The law had responded appropriately. The industry was learning, and life continued with better locks and clearer communication. It wasn't perfect, but it was orderly. And in a world where people will always write in the wrong places, sometimes order properly maintained is victory enough. A week later, the city had dried out and returned to its usual pretense that rain was merely a temporary inconvenience. The brownstone had achieved something more substantial. The deep satisfaction that comes when violated sanctity has been restored and proper order resumed. You could measure it in Fritz's humming, which had returned to its normal, tuneless contentment, and in the way the nutmeg jar sat on its shelf with its label facing true north, as if it had never been disturbed by criminal hands. The new locks gleamed with the quiet authority of lessons learned, and even Theodore had forgiven the humidistat enough to trust it with his orchids again, though he still casted occasional suspicious glances during his morning rounds. Kramer dropped by late that morning, his unlit cigar making its usual slow rotation between his teeth. He settled into his customary chair with the air of a man delivering final verdicts. "Dispositions," he announced without preamble. Lynn's counsel worked out a plea: attempted manslaughter, breaking and entering, tampering with evidence. She'll do time and write letters about culinary reform that nobody will read. Mott's license is suspended. He's singing enough names to keep prosecutors busy through Christmas. The ADA filed misdemeanor charges against Tessia, but I'd bet my pension it ends in conditional discharge if she stays clean and testifies when needed. "And Mr. Vine?" I asked. "Insufferable but educational," Kramer said, handing me a folded newspaper. "Published this morning, makes for interesting reading." The Times food section carried Vine's column under the headline, "A Critic's Education." I read it aloud while Wolfe listened with the attention he usually reserved for discussions of orchid cultivation. 3 weeks ago, I collapsed during dinner, the victim of what I believed was criminal negligence. The truth, revealed through Nero Wolfe's investigation, was more complex and personally uncomfortable. I had orchestrated a publicity stunt designed to embarrass a restaurant I felt was coasting on reputation. My plan was theatrical, but harmless, or so I believed. What I failed to consider was that my manipulations might be observed and transformed by someone with their own agenda and considerably less regard for human life. The resulting near-fatal poisoning taught me that critics who mistake themselves for crusaders often become casualties of their own righteousness. I am alive because of skilled medical intervention, masterful detection, and the providence of an allergist at Table 3. Going forward, I intend to practice criticism rather than theater, to evaluate food rather than orchestrate scandals. Some meals are more educational than others. This one nearly killed me, but it may have saved my integrity. When I finished, Wolfe was making small circles on his chair arm with his forefinger. "Mr. Vine has discovered humility," he observed. "Whether it will survive his recovery remains to be seen, but the recognition of culpability is promising." Felix called that afternoon with updates delivered in his precise, measured tones. The Metropolitan Restaurant Association has selected Rustermans as a model for employee communication protocols. Your suggestions about preventing workplace fanaticism have attracted professional attention. More importantly, we've had our best month in over a year. It seems surviving attempted murder has enhanced rather than damaged our reputation. "The public enjoys redemption narratives," Wolfe replied. "Use the attention wisely." I took a walk that evening and stopped by the bistro where Marie Tessier was working day shifts. filling holes in schedules and rebuilding her reputation one table at a time. She spotted me and approached with water and a half-smile that didn't try to be brave. "How's the law treating you?" I asked. "Like someone who did something stupid for the wrong reasons," she said. Which is accurate. Felix wrote a character letter. Pia stopped by to tell me that if I ever move a glass wrong again, she'll come across the pass and end me personally. She means she'll hire you back when she can. "I know," she said, watching a couple decide between coffee and wine. "I thought attention would feel like validation. It feels like being under a heat lamp. I prefer being furniture." That evening, Fritz prepared dinner with visible ceremony. The menu was deliberately restorative. Leek soup, roast chicken with herbs, and as the centerpiece, mashed potatoes presented on a fresh, unblemished serving dish. He set them down with the gravity of a priest placing communion wine on an altar, the surface pristine and unmarked, ridged in perfect symmetrical swirls that spoke of craft undisturbed by human folly. Wolfe received them with appropriate reverence. He took his first bite with eyes closed, savoring not just the texture and flavor, but the sheer, unadulterated purity of food prepared without agenda or contamination. The faint nod that followed wasn't mere approval. It was absolution. We ate in the comfortable silence that follows the successful restoration of proper order. These weren't just potatoes. They were a reaffirmation of the brownstone's integrity, a culinary declaration that sanity had returned to both kitchen and dining room. Only after coffee had been served did Wolfe offer his final reflection on the case. He swirled the dark liquid in his demitasse, his gaze distant, contemplating the vast and unpredictable landscape of human folly. "Sanctity, Archie," he began, his voice carrying the deliberate cadence of a man who had arranged all the pieces and now intended to show their deeper meaning. A pompous word, but serviceable. We declare certain rooms, certain rules, certain acts, sacred not because gods demand it, but because we require islands of order in a chaotic world. A kitchen is such a place. So is a table. So, sometimes, is a reputation. He paused, taking a measured sip. Miss Lynn possessed the dangerous combination of passionate conviction and limited imagination. She saw genuine problems, standards slipping, complacency growing, but chose the most direct solution, regardless of moral consequence. She confused vigilance with violence, reform with revenge. Excellence, true excellence, is not theater, Archie. It is habit. Standards are not maintained through spectacle, but through daily commitment to doing things properly, whether anyone is watching or not. His eyes settled on the empty potato dish. She violated more than Mr. Vine's health or my kitchen's sanctity. She violated the fundamental covenant that makes civilization possible. That food is nourishment, not weapon. That kitchens are sanctuaries, not stages for personal drama. That trust, once broken, requires patient restoration. Wolfe leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking softly. But the brownstone is resilient. It has absorbed the shock, purged the poison, and returned to its proper function. The locks are changed, the routines restored, and the mashed potatoes are once again innocent of literary ambition. "So all's well that ends well," I said, rising to gather the empty cups. Though I suspect Miss Lynn will have plenty of time to reconsider her recipe for reform in whatever kitchen they assign her upstate. Wolfe was already reaching for his book, the case officially closed in his mind. "Next time someone wishes to send me a message, Archie, suggest they use the telephone. It's considerably less invasive than my lunch." I climbed the stairs, leaving him to his final contemplations. The brownstone settled into its evening quiet, not mere silence, but the specific peace that comes when all the machinery is functioning properly and the people who tend it understand their roles. Outside, the city continued its eternal conversation with the night, but inside, order reigned supreme. The case was closed, the fees collected, the lessons learned. Tomorrow would bring new mysteries, new violations of proper order that would require correction. But tonight, the mashed potatoes were safe from literary vandalism. The locks were secure against unwelcome intrusions, and Nero Wolfe's world had returned to its proper balance. In a profession that dealt regularly with human folly and criminal passion, perhaps that was victory enough. The sanctuary held, the covenant remained unbroken, and dinner had been served without drama or deception. Some stories end with explosions. Others end with the quiet satisfaction of problems properly solved and meals properly served. In Nero Wolfe's world, the latter was infinitely preferable. The mashed potatoes, unmarked and perfect, seemed to agree.